Today, we're going to entertain the question, how does one leverage one's career, the knowledge, experience that one's accumulated to this point, into creating a more meaningful life? I don't have any financial disclosures to make. And in building this presentation, it's been both the easiest and the most difficult one I've ever done. It's easiest because there's hardly any literature. It is the most difficult because there's hardly any literature. And the literature is, by nature of the topic, it's more survey literature, and it could go anywhere, right? We could do anything. We could flip burgers, we could do anesthesia. And so for the purpose of this talk, we're going to talk about things that would leverage logically outside of a career experience as an anesthesiologist. Now, because of that dearth in literature, I've taken a number of interviews with different physicians. They've been kind enough to share their experience and knowledge with us. And I would say as we watch this together, at least my experience of it is sometimes because of the broad nature, something won't make sense, or it really won't resonate with me at this point. But sometimes later on, sometimes those points do make sense. So I would encourage kind of that open-mindedness, and then just an appreciation for the vulnerability that these individuals are sharing, because they're sharing some of their strengths and some of their success stories and some of their challenges and the things that they've had to live through. So to kick us off, all careers began somewhere. Dr. Gangadhar, a good friend of mine, is going to share his origin story.
Even going back into the second grade, my parents showed me this book that I'd written. It was called the Me Book, meaning about myself. And I'd drawn a stick figure of myself over an operating table with a scalpel in my hand. So I think in some ways I had an early inkling that I wanted to do something like that. But I think in high school, it more crystallized, and I decided, yes, I did want to be a doctor. And then I did a 2-year cornea transplant fellowship at Harvard Medical School, Mass General's Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary.
So after the origin, that might be when you're young, it might be in college, we all embark on this similar journey. And unfortunately, for a significant percentage of us, what worked for us in one phase in our life is no longer working in the current phase. In fact, the AMA did a survey where only 57%, or just slightly above half, of physicians would choose medicine if they were choosing over again. And several other surveys in the last year have indicated that about 25% of us are actively looking for non-clinical options to our clinical careers. When I think about career, I think traditionally of that, well, college, med school, residency, maybe chief resident, maybe fellowship, get your first job, prove yourself in that job, and work your way up, become tenured or partnered, and then gradually, get on some committees, and then maybe a vice chair, and then kind of cap out your career as in a chair position, something like that. So somewhere, midstream is when you're at the height of probably your earning potential and your power, your autonomy, your control within your career. It's interesting, in that Medscape 2023 survey, they looked at different age cohorts, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, et cetera. And they asked of the cohort that are wanting to leave medicine within 2 years by age. And interesting that the 50 to 59 year old cohort was the one most contemplating a career change. I find that kind of interesting for the reasons I mentioned before. It is also coincident, and I wouldn't call it, this is not a study here. This is just a few things stacked on this PowerPoint screen. When you look at the U curve of happiness, this is a poor representation of it. That's happiness in the US. And you will find that it is at its lowest point in that point in one's career where you probably are at the highest pay, highest or higher level in your position, most say seniority, et cetera. And it's very interesting, and that all of these seem to tell the same story, that whatever it is may not be working for everybody in all situations. It might be working for some, but for some, it clearly is not. When you look at where physicians are wanting to go, the Medscape survey did a pretty interesting breakdown. And really, you look at it, you see that, 48% education, 31% healthcare business companies, 20% pharmaceutical, 15% hospital leadership. Many of those are kind of almost direct outshoots from one's core competencies. And that makes sense. In this presentation, Dr. Gangadhar went into education. I went into education, but I did a couple stints in leadership. And then Dr. Liu, we'll get to her. She talked about reimagining how she wanted to look at life. But if one's contemplating a transition, it makes sense to do something that's somewhat leveraging your core competencies and leveraging your network, which will inherently be around medicine if you've been doing this a while. So kicking us off is Dr. Thomasson. Now, he's a family practitioner by training. He's been a career administrator, and he got his start in the utilization review business, working with a health insurer. Subsequently, he's become a chief medical officer, and he's had a long and very successful leadership career, all outside the line. So here's a few pearls from Dr. Thomasson.
Career journey looking to be a family practitioner. By my third year, I'd recognized that clinic medicine was not my passion. So each resident was given a project. I got lucky and pulled up a utilization project. I got introduced to kind of different rule sets for utilization, especially on the Medi-Cal side, how that all works. I started reading the California Code regulations and the Medi-Cal provider manual. And I found out that one of the providers was abusing a certain code and overutilizing it. I dug into the claims data. I pulled up the rule sets. I educated all leaders in the organization about that. It turns out that it ends up being about a $4 million overcharge. At the end of that year, the health plan was offering me a sign-on bonus once I graduated and a full-time job. I became their associate medical director at the health plan. Ultimately, it turned into a massive saving for the health plan. It was $4 million of back billing. Ultimately, that provider got fined for, and they had to write a check for it. Crazily enough, he had the money to do so. Always think broadly and learn as much as you can where you're at. Who are the people that make these rules up? And why do we have to do all this stuff? Then you start learning about all that background that comes into hospital administration, where the rules come from. As you learn that, you're informed of, oh my gosh, there's a whole world out there of people like lawyers and doctors who have nothing better to do than write all the rules that we all have to follow and then enforce them. I always ask attendings, hey, what's the weirdest job you've ever heard about in medicine, that a doctor can do? And what does that look like? In every job opportunity I had started with somebody in the network. Networking is totally key. And then certainly if somebody offers a project, say, hey, we need somebody to volunteer to take a look at this or that, because, hey, this is a new program that the state or the feds are funding. Stepping up for that is key. And I don't let a lack of experience in any given topic stymie my desire. I look for ways to, who can I connect myself with who has a skill set that would serve my gap in knowledge. I think there are a lot of willing teachers and mentors out there, but they're waiting for someone to ask, what would free your time up to help me learn more about it? That's what I used to ask. How can I free up your time to help teach me?
Moving on to a leadership case example. In my own career, I've done two significant journeys into leadership. So the first part, the traditional doctor route, and then for whatever reason, the right confluence of external situations, they needed an emergent department chair on an interim basis, and I happened to be standing in the right place. Now, the bad news is I was sorely inexperienced and didn't have the knowledge for it. The good news is it gave me an opportunity, and it lit a fire, and I spent a good amount of time getting educated. Over the course from a chair to med staff president, I probably spent in excess of $100,000, and that's like a decade ago's money. So a lot of education, because it's credentialing, peer review, external peer review, all of these type of things I never learned about in residency, and actually most of the physicians don't know about it. And knowledge is very, very much power in these type of situations. Secondly, was my mentor recommended joining the AOCA. He was an MD, but he said, you know, DOs are a relative minority. It's very important that you work together. And in doing so, and you don't need to join the AOCA, but it's important to join some organization that's not too ginormous, because if it's small enough, then you can get opportunities to get on committees. You can become speakers earlier than you would in a large organization, and you can get more experience and more network outside of your day job. And finally, project learning for me has been key, just like Dr. Thomasson said. And this article, looking specifically to anesthesiologists, the gist of it, I think, is one, take your professional development seriously, or your education. And secondly is get out of the operating rooms. And that's very, very much key. You already have good relationships and have credibility with your surgeons. You need to do that with physicians and administration outside of the OR to really set yourself up for future career success and buoy and protect your current career success. In terms of project learning, I have 6 or 5 quick bullet points that I would always consider. One, am I passionate about it? Life's too short to do something I'm not passionate about. 2, I have to think that it's going to be successful. I don't want to take on something that's impossible to do. 3, can I market it? And if there's 2 projects, one I could market inside the OR and one outside the OR, and I could do one, I would always pick the one outside the OR. And 4 and 5, can I put it on my CV? How can I explain it? And then will it give me new network connections, new friends and relationships? So during that time, I would set up quarterly meetings with different people in different spaces, definitely outside of anesthesia and surgery, because I wanted to, well, one, I liked them, and I wanted to build that knowledge base and all over. And you never know what's going to happen in life. So as things progressed, I realized that I was no longer a good fit in my current position, even though I'd been there for a number of years. And that was pretty scary. So I knew I needed to make a change. I didn't know exactly how it was going to look. But I knew I could possibly need more than that 6-month runway that we're all supposed to save up. So I actually sold one of my rental properties and got a couple years runway on deck. So I felt like I could responsibly go work my way out in the world until I landed something that was a good fit. So I ended up taking the dean position and picking some project strategically with the same strategy that I just outlined, and impressed the president of the university, and then became dean and chief academic officer. But I think that transition budget is something that is very, very important to think about. And it's really something you want to think about a few clicks up before you need it. So if things are starting to not feel so great, you want to start thinking about ways that you can up that runway so you have the maximal number of choices should you have to make a transition. Now, sometimes life happens to us. Sometimes transitions are not self-initiated. And here's Dr. Gangadar's story.
28 years into my practice, I was at my peak. I was operating at a frenetic pace, seeing lots of patients. I was, I guess you could say I was at the top of my game. I was the go-to guy for anything eyes in this state, and that was a good feeling. So one Sunday night before surgery day on Monday, I was sitting there in my living room just watching a sitcom, and I happened to just randomly cover my left eye, and I noticed the things in my right eye were a little wavy. Boy, that was a little unsettling on a Sunday night. And on Monday morning when I went in, I had one of my technicians perform a retina scan on me. And what I saw was a bit scary, because I saw a very dense membrane of scar tissue growing on my retina. And so I immediately called my colleagues and friends who were retina surgeons, and I said, look, I think I might have a problem. And so within 48 hours, they saw me and they said, Dasa, this is potentially a problem, but let's watch it carefully. but I noticed over the course of 3 weeks, my vision deteriorated rapidly. And so I went into the retina surgeon again. The next visit was supposed to be 3 months away, but 3 weeks away, I'm getting back into the retina office. And I was having more difficulties operating during those 3 weeks because I was started losing my stereopsis. And I was turning up the light on the operating microscope, turning down the lights in the operating room, anything to give me better contrast, but I knew I was struggling. So when I went back to the retina doctor urgently, they noticed that this membrane had behaved in a very, very unusual way. And of course, being in the medical field and specifically ophthalmology, things never go the way they do for most people. So this membrane had contracted, ripping a hole in my macula, which is the center part of our retina, which gives our fine vision detail. And so when I developed that macular hole, I knew that that may be the end. So I got that diagnosis of a macular hole while I was in surgery. They called me and said they reviewed the scans and they said, you've developed a macular hole. So I had 3 cases left that day. And at that point, I knew that it was likely my last 3 cases. So I called in all my surgery scrubs. I had 3 different surgery scrubs. Only one, of course, was with me that day. So I called my office and had my 2 other scrubs come and join me for those last 3 cases. And I wanted us all to be together because they had gotten me through the last 3 decades. They were like my family. So we finished those last 3 cases, and I would have to say that it was a teary last 3 cases because I knew in my heart and in my brain that that was probably it. So suddenly, I was out of work. And so my surgery was scheduled 2 weeks later. During those 2 weeks, I kind of put my affairs in order, if you will. I knew I wasn't dying, but I knew that my career may be changing or ending. So I did have surgery. It was now recovery time. And so for the next 8 months, I was unemployed. This time of unemployment was a time where I was hoping, praying, wishing that my vision would improve sufficiently to allow for a surgical career. 8 months later, I had to decide whether to wander away into the sunset or do something different.
When we think about transition and change, one thing we often don't appreciate is the frequency that it actually happens. And why is that? Well, if we think about, as life expectancies have increased, great grandpas and grandpas, grandmas will have not experienced maybe the same number of changes that someone with a longer lifespan would have. In fact, when you look at the millennials with their projected, 15 jobs throughout a career, that of course isn't physicians, that's kind of mind-boggling to me. And on top of that, when you look at major disruptors in life, 47% of them actually are involuntary. And these transitions tend to bundle in the midlife. So if you think about, we got 25% of physicians actively wanting to leave medicine, and another unknown percentage that are going to be forced to leave medicine or alter medicine, we actually have a significant number of us who are at risk for a transition. A risk may or may not be the right word, but I think most of us don't like transitions and uncertainty, especially being physicians. We like to be in control of our patient situations. One of the things that I think helps us as humans is the cognitive bias that we have. It's called the end of history illusion, where we kind of perceive the present moment, that everything is fixed, like we finally become ourselves. Then the change from a human perspective is only recognized in retrospect. And studies have shown that at every age, we underestimate the number of change that are coming in the future. So this begets the need for what Dan Gilbert has termed transitional intelligence. And this is actually quite important because this is something that happens, as we can see, to a significant number of all individuals, not only physicians. I think one thing particular about physicians is, almost a third of us have significant guilt around the money spent on our education. That's a burden. Honestly, that is quite a burden, both logistically and emotionally. But there are many ways that some of our like imposter syndrome, for example, many physicians have a degree of imposter syndrome. Well, that keeps us from going for the promotion, going for the med staff residency, something like that. It also keeps us from stepping out into the very unknown of, well, what if I got out of my comfort zone and did something completely different? So I think physicians have a very unique, in some ways, possibly even more difficult transition than many other people do. And it has many implications to even how we see ourselves. This is Dr. Gangadhar reflecting a bit.
People don't really realize what part of an identity it is, and then their entire social structure, at least in their own minds, has you in that identity: the wife, the kids, the parents, the staff, the friends.
You're right. I mean, we do, as much as we like to be individuals and we like to have these lives outside of medicine, there's no doubt that a good portion of our identity is wrapped up in our profession. I mean, Wichita's, even though it's a 500,000 population, I couldn't leave home without being accosted by multiple patients out to dinner, at a theater, and that was kind of a good thing. I mean, it was an ego boost, and my kids saw this, and it was nice to have that. And I won't say that it wasn't a big part of me.
Our final case study is Dr. Liu. Now, she did the traditional, you name it, college, med school, residency, fellowship job. She established a pediatric anesthesia service at a large health institution. She made partner, did all the right things, and then quit and downsized, sold the house, rented, reduced expenses, and began working a couple of days a week only. And it's interesting to me, the younger me would have looked at this as some sort of a failure, some sort of a waste of resources. I would have prioritized the other things over the actual physician and the physician's perspective in that moment. And yet, as I'm hitting the age I am now, I think this perspective is actually a question that we all actually should ask, and we all will ask at some point in our lives. In reviewing the literature, there's one of the studies on nonlinear career paths found a couple things. One, that non-traditional work arrangements were had positive impacts on both men and women. But the one thing that was very interesting to me was for extended leave, in this example, that women had reported more adverse impacts on their personal lives and careers. So there very well may be a different set of expectations on women as they choose to do things in a little bit different way than is traditionally done. Now we'll go to Dr. Liu and hear kind of her shared perspective on career.
I have always directed my life the way I wanted to go. And I had this preconceived idea what my life would be. Start with an organization and with the organization. And it was almost like a retirement is like a destination. I had somebody come into my life that triggered some thinking about thinking outside of the box. Then I realized, well, then once you get there, what are you going to do? Why is that? It's just an idea, but what exactly is that? Thing number one, talk to people that have gone through it. Don't necessarily talk to your peers and your colleagues because they're still in it. And then sometimes you'll get negative feedback because they themselves are maybe afraid to do it, even though they may say they want to do it. But then when I actually tell some of my peers about when I'm doing it, a lot of times I get this reaction like shock and surprise, like, oh, how can you do that? And that create a little bit of a sort of, it makes you doubt your decision. Really talk to somebody who's done it, not necessarily physicians. I mean, I feel like entrepreneurs have that mentality. I feel like talking to entrepreneurs actually have helped me Instead of just thinking about it, I started doing my homework about, can I really do it financially? I talked to a financial planner. I talked to other people who have done it. I went ahead, did my budget, you know. Once I did the homework, and then I realized that I could actually do it. That's the hardest part. That takes a lot of inner work. I worked with a life coach that helped me, read a lot of books. There are so many books out there. Books, I think, shows that you're not alone, that uncertainty is part of the human experience. I started keeping a journal, and that helped. For me, like journaling how you're feeling emotionally. Sometimes when you reach a weak moment, you can go back to your journal and say, these are the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. And sometimes you get reminded why it refocuses you. I'm really surprised that I was able to do it. The anticipation and, you know, of like planning and thinking about it, analysis paralysis, right? Hanging on it for so long. And I think in some ways I never thought I was going to be able to do it. And then when I finally did it, when I finally made the decision to leave and sell my house, the anticipation was the hardest, and I went through a really hard time. But once it's said and done, I felt like immediately my mind was put at peace. And I was really surprised that I was able to transition into it as easily as I did.
You know, in summary, there's many different journeys, many different lives, many different paths. There is an increasing number of resources. I'm not endorsing or not endorsing. This is just a screenshot of a New England Journal of Medicine Career Center. If you have any specific questions or you want to reach out or talk to a community, at the end, I'm going to have an email. So please don't hesitate to email. I do not make any money on this, so I'm not going to charge you anything for coaching or anything like that. But there are many, many paths and many, many lives. And physician lives actually are quite important. And what the whole crux of this presentation is really prioritizing the physician lives. So we're going to close it out with a couple end of the stories that are a little bit positive, because at least in my experience, leaving clinical medicine has been absolutely the best thing I've ever done.
You have to realize that, yes, your identity is wrapped up in what you did for nearly 3 decades, but, you know, all of us have other things that we can give. We all have other talents, other skills. And it made me realize that maybe I could touch people in another way that was different from being in an operating room. We are but one event from having a life-changing consequence. So, you know, it's easy to feel invincible, but we have to always be aware of our own mortality and our own vulnerability. You always have to plan. And in that sense, you know, I think we as physicians need to, from day one, plan for what we will do if we can't do what we're doing anymore. Keep your horizons broad. Don't narrow yourself so much that this is the only thing you can do or the only thing you'd be interested in. Always keep your horizons broad. Do more than just the core of your field. Teach. You know, be involved in training the next generation. Get involved in other activities just beyond your core practice, whether it is, you know, doing clinical trials, whether it is being involved with pharmaceutical companies in research, whether it is doing something completely outside of medicine. Always keep your scope broad so that you have the ability to immediately pivot and throw your heart into something that you're passionate about. You know, I would say that life doesn't end when your profession ends. In some ways, life can begin. There aren't very many people that are privileged to have a career that they love and then get to do a second career that they equally love. So I guess I would say I feel blessed. I feel blessed with the opportunities that I've been given to have two careers, both of which I'm passionate about.
Don't overthink it. Don't fall into the analysis paralysis when you think of every single possible scenarios that can go wrong. Reframe and say, what if every single scenario goes right?
Well, I want to thank you very much for listening. And my wish for each and every one of you is to keep that light in your eyes you had when you were young or when you started the journey. And if it ever starts to dim, reach out to your peers, your colleagues, your community, and let's all look out for each other. Thank you very much.